Well, for more on Malaysia's economic pulse, I'm joined by Mark Mealy, Vice President of Policy at the US-ASEAN Business Council. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Now, given the timing of this scandal, especially where Malaysia's economy is right now, how is this all affecting them?
Well, it's been interesting. The headlines have been quite significant, and I think what many investors that we get to work with are increasingly still very focused on the fundamentals of the economy. So, for example, last year, Malaysia still grew at 5% GDP growth. This year, the forecast has growth around 4.5% GDP growth, while let's say the portfolio investment capital flows into Malaysia have still not really recovered quite back to sort of those pre-heightened scandal levels. Actually, it's still quite an interesting investment proposition. We still have a lot of companies that are still looking at Malaysia as a good place to do business. So the political scandal seems to be more of like a background noise as opposed to a really fundamental driver of sentiment right now.
So it doesn't seem to be scaring off investors. So as we look ahead then, how does the Prime Minister survive this scandal? Will it even be a problem?
Well, I think, he's been, very successful politically in really leveraging the fact that the opposition in Malaysia, while has been successful in recent years in winning elections, still really is not really strong enough, I think, to really take full advantage of perhaps this political crisis that has emerged. So I think right now the Prime Minister politically is looking to stay the course. As the economy continues to do well in spite of some of the global headwinds which you mentioned, the fact remains that there really is not a need for the current government to call elections until really as late as 2018. So in a sense, he does have, in a sense, a bit of time to continue to try to maintain a positive image and program for the country.
Now, outside of investors, there's also people asking, why the need for these alleged payoffs? What were people getting out of the Malaysian Prime Minister's actions?
Yeah, it's very hard to understand. I mean, a country that is a very modern country has a very vibrant kind of democracy, a democracy that actually had been kind of evolving over the last decade into more of a two-party kind of system between the ruling coalition and the opposition. This sort of development kind of gives you some pause as to sort of what's maybe kind of going on, let's say, behind the scenes in terms of the political process. I think, we're still very much watching the situation. I'm sure there's some who want to see how this situation evolves going forward. At the same time, though, relative to some of Malaysia's neighbors, where in Thailand there's perhaps even a more serious political situation that I think people are very concerned about. A number of other countries are going through political transitions as we speak. So in some ways, Malaysia still seems relatively politically stable relative to the other economies in the region.
Now, speaking of some of the economies that could be linked there, Malaysia is a member state of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. So how is all this then affecting the other member states?
Well, I think this is an important question because Malaysia is in a leadership position in this region. And as the region is embarking on its own regional economic integration agenda to form an ASEAN economic community, it would be very helpful if Malaysia could really be focused on pushing forward on some of the regional kinds of questions that are out there to move this process forward. The fact remains, though, I guess as a region, the outlook remains quite positive. Singapore, again, is going through a very, I think, robust kind of reform agenda to really promote productivity innovation. Myanmar as one of sort of the most exciting, how should we say, emerging or frontier markets, and really Vietnam. Vietnam and Malaysia right now, as both members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, are really both, I think, going to be well positioned to attract a lot of interest if and when the TPP is successfully into force.
Now, speaking of trade, there is something I want to tap on, which is palm oil. We're seeing that right now prices are at a 2-year high. And I'm trying to understand, why do you think this is so important for Malaysia, given everything else that's going on in the world?
Well, I think, Malaysia has a very diverse economy, from electronics to energy, as well as palm oil. So palm oil does play an important commodity role in the economy. It's actually one of the reasons why there's been another issue out there in terms of the role of having immigrant labor to come into the economy. There are some who have been trying to make the call that it's time for Malaysia to have some of its leading sectors should no longer really depend upon sort of immigrant, low-skilled labor. It should really have these industries try to move towards more higher productivity innovation. Obviously, for some, business leaders, they have been very, well served by having a good supply of, let's say, immigrant labor. So I think we're probably at a point in Malaysia now where, again, this is a particular sort of transition period where you've got proponents on both sides of that question. But palm oil remains an important engine of growth for the country.